The wind was a predator. It stalked the high ridges of the great valley, a shapeless, howling beast of immense power and chilling intent. It was a hunter of warmth, a thief of life, and in the heart of the great cold, its hunting was good. For Turok, a young man of the Sky Mountain clan, the wind was a constant companion, a remorseless enemy, and the sound of his world. He crouched lower behind a granite outcrop, the coarse fur of his tunic pulled tight around his sinewy frame, his knuckles white as he gripped the smooth, cold wood of his spear. His breath plumed in the frigid air, a fleeting ghost of warmth immediately torn away by the gale. Below him, in the windswept basin, was the reason for his vigil. A small herd of longhorned bison, their shaggy brown coats dusted with the first persistent snowflakes of the season. They were magnificent creatures, mountains of muscle and fur, their very existence a defiance of the harsh landscape. They were also life, meat for the clan, hides for warmth, bones for tools. But they were not easy prey. The clan had learned that lesson through generations of hunger and loss, their history etched not in stone tablets but in the scars on their bodies and the empty spaces where loved ones used to sit. Turok was not the strongest of the clan's hunters. That honor belonged to Kalen, the clan leader, a man built like an oak tree, whose powerful shoulders could launch a spear with breathtaking force and accuracy. Nor was Turok the fastest. That was Lyra, whose fleet-footed grace made her seem to dance over the treacherous terrain. Turok's strength lay in his eyes and in the quiet spaces of his mind. He saw things others missed, the subtle shift in a bird's flight path that betrayed a hidden predator, the unique fracture pattern in a piece of flint that promised a sharper edge, the way the clouds gathered in the west hours before a storm. He was an observer, a trait that often left him on the periphery of the clan's boisterous, immediate world. He watched the bison, his gaze sweeping over the herd, not just looking for a target, but reading their story. He saw the old bull, his horns scarred from countless battles, positioned protectively on the windward side. He saw the mothers nudging their calves closer, their bodies forming a living wall against the cold. And he saw the one he had been watching for 3 sun cycles. A young bull, strong but not yet wise, limping almost imperceptibly on its left foreleg. It was a small weakness, a tiny flaw in the herd's formidable defense, but it was the kind of opening the clan needed. A low grunt from behind him signaled Kalen's approach. The clan leader moved with a heavy, deliberate tread, his presence as solid and imposing as the mountains themselves. He crouched beside Turok, his scent a mixture of sweat, dried blood, and the faint, musky odor of the cave they called home. His eyes, small and sharp under a heavy brow ridge, followed Turok's gaze. "The limping one," Kalen grunted, his voice a low rumble. It was not a question. Turok nodded, pointing with his chin. "He favors the leg. When the wind gusts, he stumbles. If we can separate him, drive him towards the rockfall." Kalen considered this, his gaze fixed on the unsuspecting animal. The plan was simple, a classic maneuver of their people. A few hunters would create a disturbance, spooking the herd, while the main party would lie in wait, hoping to isolate the chosen target in the ensuing chaos and drive it into a natural trap. Simple but fraught with peril. A charging bison could crush a man in an instant. A mistimed spear throw would mean an empty-handed return to the cave, and another night of gnawing hunger. The signal was Gavina piercing cry that mimicked the shriek of a hunting eagle. From the other side of the basin, 3 young hunters leaped from their hiding places, yelling and waving their arms. The bison herd jolted, a wave of panic rippling through the massive animals. Their heads shot up, nostrils flaring, and then, as one, they broke into a thundering stampede. The ground trembled. It was a raw, terrifying display of power, a force of nature that humbled even the proudest hunter. Turok's heart hammered against his ribs, a primal fear mixing with the thrill of the hunt. He, Kalen, and the 4 others in their party broke cover, their lean bodies hugging the ground as they sprinted to intercept their quarry. The wind howled, whipping snow into their faces, blurring their vision. The limping bull, just as Turok had predicted, was quickly falling behind the main herd. Its panic, combined with its injury, made it clumsy. It was their chance. Now! Kalen roared, his voice barely audible above the storm and the stampede. They angled their pursuit, a living, breathing wall of determined hunters. They were not trying to attack yet, merely to guide. With shouts and feigned spear thrusts, they steered the terrified bull away from the open plains and towards the jagged scree slope of the western ridge, the rockfall. The animal, confused and maddened, plunged towards the trap. It was a dead end, a chaotic jumble of massive boulders and loose shale. The bull skidded to a halt, its hooves scrabbling for purchase, its great head swinging wildly. Trapped, it turned to face its pursuers, its eyes red with fury and fear. This was the moment of truth. The hunters formed a semicircle, their spears held ready. Kalen stood at the center, his primary spear gripped in both hands, its fire-hardened tip aimed at the soft flesh beneath the bison's throat. This was the kill shot, the one that had to count. The bull charged. It was not a blind, panicked rush, but a focused, desperate attack. It lowered its head, those immense horns aimed directly at Kalen. Tarak, positioned on the flank, saw the charge with the terrible clarity that often visited him in moments of extreme danger. He saw the way Kalen braced himself, planting his feet, his muscles bunching for the crucial throw. He saw the other hunters, their faces masks of tense concentration, ready to hurl their own spears to distract or wound the beast. But he also saw the loose patch of shale under Kalen's left foot. He saw the slight tremor in the ground as the 2,000-pound animal bore down on them. Kalen threw his spear. It was a perfect, powerful arc, a testament to his strength. But at the last moment, the ground beneath him shifted. His foot slipped, robbing the throw of its full, bone-shattering force. The spear struck the bison not in the throat, but high on the shoulder, a painful but not a fatal wound. The bull roared, a sound of agony and rage, and crashed into the line. A hunter named Grak was thrown aside like a child's toy, his body hitting the rocks with a sickening thud. The bull, its shoulder streaming blood, ignored him and plowed forward, its momentum carrying it past the stunned hunters and back out into the basin. It galloped away, wounded but free, disappearing into the swirling snow. Silence descended, broken only by the whimpering of the wind and Grak's pained groans. The hunt had failed. The journey back to the cave was a grim, silent procession. 2 hunters half-carried, half-dragged the injured Grak, whose leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. Kalen walked at the head of the party, his face a thunderous mask of frustration. He did not look at Tarak, but Tarak could feel the weight of his leader's unspoken blame. A good plan, a flawed execution. In the harsh calculus of their lives, it amounted to the same thing: failure. Their home, the Sky Mountain Cave, was a great, yawning mouth in the side of the mountain. It offered shelter from the wind and the snow, but it was a cold, damp, and dark refuge. The air within was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale fur, and the lingering scent of fear. As they entered, the clan turned to them, their faces a mixture of hope and anxiety. The hope died as they saw the hunters' empty hands and Grak's broken form. A low murmur of despair rippled through the gathered families. Alara, the clan's eldest woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles and wisdom, immediately moved to tend to Grak. Her hands, though gnarled with age, were gentle and sure as she examined the broken limb. There was little she could do beyond binding it with strips of hide and offering him a leather pouch of water mixed with pain-numbing herbs. For a broken leg, the only true healer was time, and time was a luxury they rarely had. That night, the hunger was a physical presence in the cave. The children whimpered, their small, distended bellies a silent accusation. The adults chewed on strips of old, tough leather, trying to trick their stomachs into feeling full. There was no fire. The clan did not have fire. It was a mythical thing, a creature of legend. They knew of its existence from the terrible forest-clearing blazes started by lightning strikes in the summer, a destructive, terrifying force that sent all living things fleeing in panic. They called it the Skyfong, a bite from the heavens. The idea of controlling it, of bringing it into their cave, was unimaginable, a thought as alien as flying to the moon. The true misery began as the sun vanished and the world outside was plunged into absolute blackness. The temperature plummeted. The cold was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a physical threat that seeped through their fur clothing and settled deep into their bones. The clan huddled together in a great, shivering mass in the center of the main chamber, sharing what little body heat they could generate. Turok found himself pressed between his mother and his younger sister, Mara. He could feel Mara's small body trembling uncontrollably, her teeth chattering. He wrapped his arms around her, trying to shield her from the worst of the chill. He remembered another night, many winters ago. He remembered his other sister, Leah. She had been small, like Mara, and had caught the coughing sickness. The cold of the night had weakened her, and by morning, her breath had been a tiny, shallow thing. By the next sunset, it was gone. The memory was a raw, unhealed wound in Turok's soul. He hated the cold. He hated the darkness that gave it cover. He hated the fear that came with it, the helpless, shivering dread that reduced his proud, strong people to a huddled, miserable flock. In the deepest dark, the sounds of the night began. The howl of a wolf pack, distant but drawing nearer. The scream of a nightcat, a chilling sound that spoke of claws and teeth. And closer, the scraping, sniffing sounds of cave hyenas, scavengers bold enough to approach the mouth of the cave, drawn by the scent of so much helpless prey. The hunters on watch, armed with spears and rocks, would stand at the entrance, their shouts and thrown stones the only defense against the encroaching dark. Turok lay awake, listening to the sounds of his world. The wind, the predators, the chattering teeth of his sister, the shallow breathing of the hungry. He stared into the oppressive blackness, a void so complete it felt like a weight on his eyelids. He thought of the sun, of its warmth and light. It was a god, a life-giver, but it was a fickle god, one that abandoned them every night to the mercy of the cold and the dark. And he thought of the skyfang. He remembered a summer, 2 years past, when a bolt of lightning had struck a great pine tree on the far side of the valley. He had watched, mesmerized from a safe distance, as the tree was consumed by a dancing, leaping creature of brilliant orange and red light. It had been terrifying, yes, but also beautiful. It had a life of its own. It devoured the tree, and in its place it gave off heat. He could feel its warmth even from across the valley. It pushed back the shadows, creating a circle of light in the gathering dusk. And no predators had dared to approach it. The memory sparked an idea in Turok's mind, a thought so radical, so audacious, that it made his own heart beat faster. What if the skyfang was not an enemy? What if it was not just a destructive force? What if it could be tamed? The thought was dismissed almost as quickly as it came. It was the fancy of a hungry, desperate mind. Taming the skyfang was impossible. One might as well try to tame the wind or chain the moon. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the immediate misery, the gnawing in his belly and the relentless, soul-stealing cold. Days turned into a week. The snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the valley in a thick shroud of white. The hunting parties went out, their desperation making them reckless, but they returned with little to show for their efforts. A few snow hares, a skinny mountain goat scraps that were barely enough to keep the clan from starvation. Grak's leg festered, and the smell of sickness was added to the cave's already pungent aroma. The clan's morale sank to its lowest ebb. The nights were the worst, long, freezing ordeals of shared misery and fear. It was during one of these terrible nights that the storm came. It was not a normal winter storm of snow and wind. This was a storm of the sky itself. The wind rose to a deafening shriek, and the air crackled with a strange energy. Then the sky split open. Jagged spears of blinding white light tore through the darkness, followed moments later by claps of thunder so violent they shook the very foundations of the mountain. The clan cowered in terror. This was the anger of the sky gods made manifest. The children screamed, burying their faces in their mothers' furs. The hunters, even the mighty Kalen, pressed themselves against the back wall of the cave, their faces pale with superstitious dread. Tarak, however, was not cowering. He found himself drawn to the cave entrance, his ever-present curiosity overriding his fear. He watched, his eyes wide with awe, as the heavens raged. And then he saw it. A bolt of lightning, thicker and more brilliant than any before it, struck the ancient, dead oak tree that stood sentinel on the ridge directly across from their cave. The impact was explosive. The sound was a deafening crack that seemed to split the world in two. For a heart-stopping moment, the dead tree glowed with an unholy white light, every branch and twig outlined in fire. Then the light subsided, and in its place, a flower of orange and red bloomed upon the wood. The skyfong. It had come again. But this time, it was not a distant terror in a far-off forest. It was close. It was a tangible presence, a beacon of light and rage in the heart of the storm. While his clan huddled and prayed to spirits they did not understand, Tarak felt a different emotion stirring within him. It was not fear. It was a wild, desperate, and exhilarating idea. The same one he had dismissed before, now returned with the force of the thunderclap itself. The cold, the hunger, the darkness, the predators, his sister Leah's fading breath. All these miseries were born of a world without warmth, a world without light. And there, across the chasm, burning in defiance of the storm, was the answer. A mad plan began to form in his mind. It was a plan born of desperation and inspired by a lifetime of observation. He would not cower from the skyfong. He would go to it. He would face the beast from the heavens. And he would attempt the impossible. He would try to capture a piece of it and bring it home. He glanced back at the terrified faces of his clan, then at his sister Mara, who was weeping silently in his mother's arms. He knew what they would think. Madness.
Suicide.
An offense to the spirits. But what was their current existence if not a slow, freezing death? The hunters were failing. The sick were not recovering. The cold was winning. Tarak made his choice. As the storm raged around him, he slipped away from the cave entrance, grabbing a long, thick branch from the precious pile of firewood they rarely used. Its wood chosen for its durability. He would not tell anyone his plan. They would try to stop him. This was a journey he had to make alone. He cast one last look at his shivering family, the image searing itself into his mind, fueling his resolve. Then, he turned his face to the wind and the lightning, and began his perilous descent towards the burning tree. He was Tarak, the observer, the quiet one. But tonight he would be a thief. He would steal fire from the sky. The journey across the chasm was a battle against the elements and his own fear. The wind tore at him, trying to rip him from the narrow, icy ledge. The snow, driven into horizontal sheets by the gale, stung his face and blinded him. Every crash of thunder felt like the mountain itself was groaning in protest of his audacious quest. Below, the chasm was a pit of absolute darkness, a fall that promised certain death. But Tarak's focus was singular, fixed on the dancing light ahead. The burning oak tree was his lighthouse in the heart of the tempest. As he drew closer, a new sensation pushed back against the biting cold: warmth. It was a gentle caress at first, then a palpable wave of heat that seemed to melt the ice in his veins. He had never felt such a thing. The huddled warmth of his clan was a meager, desperate thing compared to this powerful, radiating energy. It was life. It was power. He finally stood before the tree, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. It was a terrifying spectacle. The great oak was a column of writhing, roaring flame, spitting sparks into the wind like angry insects. The sound was a hungry crackle and hiss, the tree's ancient life being consumed and reborn as light and heat. He held the thick branch he had carried, his intended vessel, like a shield. He felt an overwhelming urge to turn and flee back to the familiar misery of the cave. But the image of Mara's shivering form, of Leah's last, cold breath, held him fast. He was an observer. He had watched animals, weather, and stones. Now he watched the fire, He saw how it danced and lunged, how it seemed to breathe, inhaling the air and exhaling heat. He noticed that while the main trunk was a raging inferno, some of the smaller, broken branches on the ground burned with a less ferocious, more manageable glow. He could not capture the whole beast, but perhaps he could take one of its cubs. His plan was simple and likely foolish. Using the large branch he carried, he would try to hook a smaller, burning piece of wood and drag it away from the main fire. He circled the inferno, the heat growing so intense it singed the hairs on his arms and made his skin feel tight. He chose his target, a broken limb about the length of his arm, glowing a steady, brilliant orange. He took a deep breath, the air hot and tasting of smoke, and lunged forward. He hooked the burning limb with his branch and pulled. It was heavier than he expected. He strained, his muscles screaming in protest, digging his heels into the snowy ground. For a moment it wouldn't budge. Then, with a crackle of separating fibers, it came free. He dragged the smoldering prize away from the parent fire, his own personal captured piece of the skyfang. It lay on the snow, hissing and steaming, a living coal of impossible heat. Now came the true challenge: getting it home. He couldn't carry it with his bare hands. He had to use his carrier branch, awkwardly pushing and rolling the ember log along the treacherous path. It was a slow, clumsy, and agonizingly difficult process. Several times he nearly lost his prize over the edge of the cliff. The wind, as if furious at his theft, seemed to redouble its efforts, trying to extinguish his fragile flame. But the ember was stubborn. It clung to life, a glowing, defiant heart. When he finally stumbled back to the mouth of the Sky Mountain cave, he was near collapse. He was covered in soot, his tunic was singed, and his eyes were red and streaming from the smoke. He pushed the glowing log before him into the cave's entrance. His arrival caused an immediate uproar. The clan, who had assumed him lost to the storm, stared in disbelief. Their shock quickly turned to terror. He had brought the skyfang into their home. Madness! Kalen roared, scrambling to his feet and grabbing his spear. You will kill us all. Take it out. Throw it back to the sky. Others shrank back, their faces pale with fear, making signs to ward off evil spirits. They saw not a source of warmth, but a harbinger of destruction, a living piece of the lightning that had so terrified them. No. Tarak croaked, his voice raw from the smoke. He positioned himself between the clan and his prize, holding his carrier branch defensively. It is not a beast. It is a gift. It is a curse, shouted Grak, hobbling forward on his splinted leg, his face contorted with anger. He has angered the spirits. Only Alara, the old, wise woman, did not recoil. She crept forward, her ancient eyes wide with a mixture of fear and intense curiosity. She stopped a few feet from the glowing log, her head tilted. She could feel its heat, a dry, powerful warmth that was wholly unnatural. It gives warmth, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. The log, starved of fuel on the damp stone floor, began to fade. Its vibrant orange deepened to a dull red. Tarak, seeing this, acted on instinct. He remembered how the fire had devoured the tree. It was hungry. He scrambled to the small pile of dry twigs and kindling they kept for making tool shafts. He tossed a handful of twigs onto the glowing ember. For a moment nothing happened. Then, a wisp of smoke curled upwards, followed by a tiny, flickering tongue of flame. The clan gasped as one. The fire fed, licked at the twigs, and grew. It was no longer just a dying coal. It was a small, dancing fire, right here, in their cave. Tarak, emboldened, added larger pieces of wood. The fire grew stronger, casting a warm, flickering light that pushed back the oppressive darkness of the cave for the first time in anyone's memory. The stark, familiar shadows of the rock walls leaped and danced, transformed into something magical. The deep, penetrating cold that had been their constant companion began to retreat. The clan watched, mesmerized. Their fear slowly gave way to wonder. The children, their tears forgotten, stared with wide, unblinking eyes at the dancing light. Mara, Tarak's sister, took a hesitant step closer, her small hands outstretched not in fear, but as if to welcome the strange, warm visitor. That night was a revolution. The clan did not huddle in a shivering mass. They gathered in a wide, loose circle around the fire. The warmth was a profound luxury, a comfort so deep it was almost painful to accept. They could see each other's faces clearly, not as vague shapes in the gloom, but as individuals, their expressions illuminated by the golden light. The sounds of predators outside the cave still came, but they seemed less threatening now. The fire was a guardian, a wall of light and heat that kept the terrors of the night at bay. For the first time, they felt truly safe in their home. Tarak became the firekeeper. It was a role he accepted with solemn gravity. He learned the fire's appetites, its moods. He learned that it needed to breathe, that piling the wood too tightly would choke it. He learned that different woods burned in different ways. Pine burned hot and fast with much crackling, while oak burned slow and steady, creating long-lasting embers. The fire became the new center of the clan's world, and Tarak, the quiet observer, became its priest. A few days later, the second miracle occurred. One of the hunters had managed to kill a large snow hare, and the meager portions were being handed out. A young boy, clumsy in his excitement, dropped his piece of raw, bloody meat. It landed on the hot stones at the edge of the fire pit with a distinct sizzle. He cried out, thinking his precious meal was lost, ruined by the skyfang. Tarak, ever curious, reached down with a stick and poked at the meat. A strange, enticing aroma was rising from it, a smell unlike anything he had ever known. It was rich, savory, and made his mouth water in a way that raw meat never had. He pulled the piece of hair from the heat. One side was browned and crisped. He hesitated for only a moment. Then, driven by a scientific curiosity that was uniquely his, he took a bite. The sensation was a revelation. The meat, usually tough and sinewy, was tender. The fat had melted, releasing a burst of flavor that was intensely satisfying. It was warm, easy to chew, and slid down his throat without the usual struggle. It was, without question, the most delicious thing he had ever eaten. He looked at the boy who was staring at him, expecting him to be cursed or to spit the meat out in disgust. Instead, Tarak's face broke into a wide grin. He tore off a small piece of the cooked meat and offered it to the boy. Hesitantly, the child took it and put it in his mouth. His eyes went wide with astonishment. Soon, the entire clan was gathered around, watching as Tarak cautiously placed more pieces of meat on the hot stones. The cave filled with the incredible aroma of roasting food. They ate the cooked meat with a sense of reverence and discovery. It was more than just delicious. They found they could eat it faster, and it didn't sit as heavily in their stomachs. Kalen, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of roasted hare, grunted in approval. Even he could not deny the evidence of his senses. This was better. This was stronger food. The fire changed everything. The hunters' morale was boosted. They knew that even a small kill could now be turned into a satisfying, warming meal. Alara discovered that certain herbs, when heated in water by dropping hot stones into a hide-lined pit, released their healing properties more effectively. Grak's festering wound, when cleansed with this warm, herb-infused water, began to look better. The fire became a social force. It extended their day, allowing them to work on tools and mend hides long after the sun had set. They gathered around it not just for warmth, but for companionship. In the flickering light, the elders began to tell stories, their voices weaving tales of the ancestors, of great hunts and powerful spirits. Language itself seemed to flourish in the warmth and light, as grunts and gestures were supplemented with new words to describe new feelings and ideas. The cave was no longer just a shelter. It was a home, a place of community and culture. One evening, a massive cave lion, drawn by the scent of the roasting meat, appeared at the entrance of the cave. In the past, this would have been a moment of pure terror. But now, Kalen and the other hunters simply stood up, grabbed burning branches from the fire, and strode towards the entrance. The great cat, a predator that feared nothing, took one look at the approaching wall of menacing, dancing flames, and snarled in frustration and fear. It backed away and disappeared into the night. The clan let out a triumphant roar. They were no longer the prey. Weeks later, Tarak led a successful hunt for the same herd of bison. They managed to isolate and kill a large female, and this time there were no mistakes. They butchered the animal and carried the massive haunches of meat back to the cave. That night they held a great feast. The entire clan ate their fill of roasted bison, the rich, cooked meat giving them a strength and vitality they had never known. Their bellies were full, their bodies were warm, and their hearts were filled with a new and powerful hope. As the clan celebrated, singing and telling stories around the glorious fire, Tarak sat slightly apart, watching the flames as he always did. He was no longer Tarak the outcast, the strange, quiet boy. He was Tarak the firebringer, the one who had challenged the sky and won. He had seen a problem, the cold, the dark, the hunger, and had looked for an answer, not in tradition or superstition, but in observation and courage. He looked into the heart of his captured star, the dancing, living flame. He had stolen it from the sky, and in doing so, he had given his people a new world. The night was no longer an enemy to be feared, but a temporary darkness between the evening and morning fires. The cold could be beaten. Food could be transformed. Their lives, once a desperate, shivering struggle for survival, now held the bright, warm spark of a future. And it had all begun with one person, daring to walk towards the light.